Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Chris sent me a story, so Steve, check out this one from Atlanta, from WSB-TV. Ford ordered to pay $2.5 billion, $2.5 billion to Georgia family after couple was killed in a rollover crash. So the Georgia family has been awarded that money, $2.5 billion, by a jury after their loved ones were killed in a rollover crash back in 2022. Now, the couple was killed when their 2015 Ford F-250 Super Duty truck rolled over in Decatur County back in August of 22. A Columbus jury found that Ford was mostly at fault for the couple's deaths. Now, the story is not terribly long, so some of this we got to kind of extrapolate from. But when the jury found that Ford was mostly at fault, it implies that the jury said, well, some of the fault lies with somebody else. I suspect they're going to say that some of the fault was with the driver of the vehicle. We'll get there. The mother was driving the truck with the husband in the passenger seat when the truck struck a driveway drainage culvert, which caused the vehicle to go airborne for about 81 feet before smashing into the ground and flipping over. That's according to filings in the case obtained by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Now, I wasn't there. I don't know this as something I saw with my own eyes, but I can tell you that to get a Ford F-250 airborne for 81 feet would actually be difficult. And I'm not going to say it took effort because that implied that you're trying to do it, but even the Duke boys would have a hard time getting a General Lee to go 81 feet. So according to the lawsuit, attorneys for the couple's sons argued that all of Ford's Super Duty trucks from 1999 to 2016 had defective and dangerously weak roofs. Now, that crash came just a few days after another jury in Georgia awarded $1.7 billion to the family of farmers from Macon County who were killed in a rollover crash in their 2002 Ford F-250 Super Duty truck. A Ford spokesperson said, "Our sympathies go out to the family. The verdict is impermissibly extreme and not supported by the evidence," a Ford spokesperson said. Spokesperson went on to say that Ford does plan to appeal the verdict, obviously. On appeal, that number might get reduced. However, there's a few things here, as I like to say, to unpack. One of which is, how do you get your truck, to launch for 81 feet and then somehow land on its roof or roll over and hit its roof, and then say that the fault of the accident lies with the roof? But that is obviously the legal theory here. But you should understand that generally speaking, I'm talking about product liability, generally speaking, there's two different things you can look at. Something could be made as intended and the design has a problem, or it could be made in a way that it was assembled or built wrong. So if it's built as designed and they're defective, that means they're all defective. However, we've heard of stories before where something's coming down the assembly line, a part gets left off, or it's not torqued down right. I did a whole video on those. And it turns out that just those ones that were misassembled have a problem. And so the plaintiff's theory here is that every single Ford F-250 Super Duty truck built in that time frame, every single one of them is defective. Now, a lot of the people in my audience will know this, but there are government standards that are in place that the auto manufacturers must follow. And everyone knows about like crash standards or bumper standards or mileage standards, right? Fleet mileage and so on. There is a standard for the roof and how much it must be able to withstand before crushing. And I've talked to engineers about this problem. I know a bunch of engineers who work for the car companies, and I love talking to them about questions like this. And here's the thing. A car company could build a vehicle that is basically crush-proof, okay? All you got to do is put in a full NASCAR-style roll cage, have some of the pillars reinforced with, big bars of iron, and make sure the roof is nice and tall and has its own like crash cell. And then all the people in the car would be wearing, or the truck would be wearing 5-point safety harnesses and helmets. And then, of course, you can go out and do almost anything you want in that vehicle, and the passengers won't get hurt by the roof crushing. Of course, the vehicle will weigh 37,000 pounds and get 2 miles to the gallon. So there's a tension, they refer to this as, or some kind of conflict between the people who want to get the vehicle as safe as possible and the people who want it to get good gas mileage, for instance, or want to save on construction costs, because I'm joking about doing the full NASCAR roll cage and the iron bars. That'd be silly. So the question is, what standard do you build it to? Well, you at least build it to the federal standards. Now, some people are going to ask, but Steve, if I build a vehicle that meets federal guidelines and someone gets hurt, shouldn't I be able just to point at that and go, hey, I met federal guidelines? Well, the courts have said no on that one because federal guidelines are a minimum of what you've got to do. But the federal government's not guaranteeing that your car is still built safely. But the real question is let's suppose that we can go back in the old Wayback Machine here to 2014, 2013, right? And ask somebody, go, hey, we're putting these trucks on the road. And somewhere down the road, one of the drivers is going to launch one of these things 81 feet. And when it comes down, the roof is going to be impacted. Can we protect against that? And that's going to be the question. Because there are going to be some crashes where these vehicles be put to horrific lengths, and it might not be something you can protect against. Okay? And so the question then becomes, even if this thing meets federal guidelines, is it possible that it doesn't meet like the state of the art, which, by the way, is something a lot of states look at. If something is state of the art, well, you can't expect them to build it better than was known at the time. So was it built to the state of the art, and did it meet federal guidelines? And the question is there really anything you could do to prevent the vehicle from becoming unsafe in a crash when it's crashed after being launched 81 feet? 81 feet. So if you want to put that in perspective, that's a good distance past the pitcher's mound from home plate. Now, it's not quite all the way to first base, but 81 feet's quite a distance. And if you've ever been in a vehicle that's left the ground before, it can be kind of freaky and it feels funny. But most people, when they are in a vehicle that feels like it's left the ground, actually the car has simply gone up such that the suspension is extended. But to get the car off the ground, for 81 feet, to me is quite questionable as to what the cause of the injuries was here. So I will always defer to a jury because the jury heard all the evidence, the opening statements, the closing arguments, the judge's instructions, all that. The jury sat through all that. But I can also tell you that we do know that when you have tragic events where people die, especially parents who are then survived by their children, or families torn apart where a parent dies and a child dies, or people who get grievous injuries and they're going to have just medical bills for the rest of their lives, things like that, that sometimes juries look at that and go, well, we should give them something for that, right? And so the sad part is for Ford Motor Company, they're often in the news with vehicles that get them into court. And so all I got to say is the word Bronco. And right now it's people in Dearborn who just got a chill and they're not sure why. But that was a couple years ago. And there have been others. But every now and then we hear about this. But again, this is a 2015 Ford F-250 Super Duty. And the accident was in 2022. So the accident appears to have been beyond the length of the warranty, for instance. So you got a vehicle that's outside of warranty. Just pointing that out. Not saying it's dispositive, but I'm saying it's interesting to look at. So the vehicle was 7 years old, out of warranty, and was launched 81 feet. And in that crash, 2 people died. And that's a tragedy when people die. But my question is, when they're asked to apportion damages, and they're often told, if you find there's more than one cause for this, or different people or entities who are at fault, you can apportion the blame. And so I've seen it before where they say, hey, the accident was 60% this person's fault and 40% that person's fault. Some states say that if a person who is bringing a lawsuit or the victim who might have a lawsuit brought on their behalf by somebody else is more than a certain part at fault, then they can't recover anything. But that varies wildly from state to state. But the real question is, did the jury assign some blame to the driver of this vehicle that launched 81 feet? That's quite a distance, like I said. So, crazy story. We'll see what happens on appeal. I suspect that the big damage award will get struck down, especially because it's not pointed out here how much of that is punitive damages and how much of that is actual damages. And if a big chunk of that is punitive, then we go back to what I said earlier. And that is, when Ford is building a truck, did it meet federal standards? And was it state of the art? And if it was, and someone still died, how much do you punish them for that? Because you're basically saying, well, it met all standards and was built as good as it could have been built, but we're still going to punish them for $1 billion or two, which is where it starts to fall apart, I think. So, Chris, thanks for sending that interesting story out of Georgia, and I'll watch to see if there's an appeal on this, but if so, the appeal would probably get heard a year or two down the road. From the WSBTV.com news staff, Ford ordered to pay $2.5 billion to Georgia family after couple killed in rollover crash. Questions or comments? Put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. When the going gets tough, the tough use duct tape.